Imagine this. You're a decorated former lieutenant, but that was a lifetime ago. Now you're a corporate executive. You live in a quiet suburb, Garden City. You've got the respectable job, the beautiful home, the family, the whole package.
The American dream.
Exactly. But then, almost 20 years after the fighting in Vietnam ended, a book, just a book, surfaces. And the past, it doesn't just knock on your door.
No, it kicks it down.
Today we are launching a deep dive into the legal and moral labyrinth of the Benjamin J. Tyson case.
And this is a story that it absolutely rips open the question of command responsibility, the long, long reach of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ, and maybe the most unsettling part, the profoundly unreliable nature of memory itself.
Especially memories forged in combat.
Especially then.
Our sources for this, they trace the fallout from this one really influential novel. It's called Hugh, Death of a City by an author named Andrew Picard.
And we're looking at these excerpts that give you this almost agonizingly intimate look at how Tyson's life, his whole suburban world, was just dismantled.
Yeah, and we're going to detail the aggressive legal moves, the intense personal trauma his family went through, and the just astonishing progression from what looked like a libel thread into a full-blown federal murder trial.
So our mission today is really to unpack this crisis step by step. We need to trace the truly extraordinary legal lengths the military went to just to get jurisdiction over a civilian, a man who'd been out of uniform for years.
And we'll analyze how all these conflicting stories, some true, some, self-serving, and some probably just fabricated over 18 years, how they all collided to deliver a final verdict that was, it was as legally complex as it was morally profound.
It really was. But before we get into the details, there's a warning we have to talk about. It comes from Tyson's own future defense attorney, a guy named Vincent Corva.
Right. The source material quotes Corva's very cynical wisdom. He calls it the one great truth about war.
And that truth is that ultimately all war stories are, and this is a direct quote, bullshit, whether they're from a general's polished memoirs or a PFC bragging over a beer.
It's a really necessary caution, isn't it?
It is. It reminds you that what we're looking at here isn't just a straightforward criminal case. This is the military justice system trying to impose a clear, objective legal structure onto events that were, by their very nature, collective madness.
Yeah, the fog of war.
The fog of war. And the most gripping stories are always subject to distortion, to self-serving edits, and just that all-consuming confusion of combat. It makes finding the real truth almost impossible.
Okay, so let's start where it all began for Tyson. The crisis starts with that book, Hugh, Death of a City.
He finds it in a bookshop, but he doesn't read it like a historian or even a former soldier. He approaches it with just absolute dread.
He scans it. He can't even bring himself to actually sit and read the words properly. He said the feeling was like getting a Dear John letter or a telegram about a death.
And his name just keeps jumping out at him from the page. Tyson's platoon, Lieutenant Tyson, Tyson's men.
And what's jumping out is, it's an explosive allegation.
It's beyond explosive. Picard's book alleges that Tyson's platoon committed a horrific massacre at a place called Hôpital Miséricorde. This was a French hospital, supposedly filled with civilian patients, European staff, during the Battle of Hugh in 1968.
And the book doesn't pull any punches. It ranks the incident right up there with the My Lai massacre.
Which is, that's about as serious as it gets.
What's interesting, though, is how shaky the story's origin is, even according to the book itself.
Right. Picard says the account came from two of Tyson's men, just identified as PFCX and Specialist 4Y, but the original information, the source for them, was a nun, a Sister Teresa.
So you have witnesses recalling what another witness told them about something that happened 20 years ago. Legally, that's pretty thin.
It's incredibly thin, but you have to look at the timing. This book didn't come out in a vacuum. The whole national conversation around Vietnam was finally starting to shift.
For years, Hollywood and publishers had sort of shied away from the really bitter, tragic side of the war.
Exactly. But the source material notes that in the decade before this book came out, Hollywood had finally cracked that door open. You had these massive, successful films like Coming Home, The Deer Hunter.
Platoon, Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, all of them. And those films had really primed the public. People were finally willing to confront the national tragedy of it all. So there was this real mainstream appetite for a book that promised an important look at some uncomfortable truths.
And that appetite meant the book created this immediate, overwhelming legal shockwave for Tyson.
He goes straight to his corporate lawyer, a man named Sloan. And Sloan just bypasses the whole libel thing. He zeroes in on the most terrifying concept in military law.
Command responsibility.
Command responsibility. And this is where the gravity of being an officer, even 20 years later, just lands on Tyson like a ton of bricks.
Sloan tells him, look, even if you can prove you weren't even there, that you never pulled a trigger, as the platoon commander, you bear full responsibility for what your men did.
The law doesn't care about your personal actions. It cares about your position of authority.
And to really drive the point home, Sloan brings up this landmark and truly chilling legal precedent, the case of General Tomoyuki Yamashita.
We absolutely have to unpack this because this precedent becomes the entire legal framework for Tyson's eventual conviction.
Okay, so Yamashita. He commanded Japanese forces in the Philippines during World War II. After the war, the Americans put him on trial.
And the charge was that he had unlawfully disregarded and failed to discharge his duty as a commander.
But what's so terrifying about this, and what Tyson realizes he's up against, is what they didn't accuse Yamashita of.
Exactly. They didn't say he personally committed any of the atrocities his troops carried out. There was no real evidence he ordered them or even knew about them in detail.
The charges were all about his failure. His failure to anticipate what his troops might do, his failure to know what they were doing, and crucially, his failure to provide effective control over them.
So under that standard, the Yamashita standard, Tyson doesn't have to be proven to be a monster who ordered a massacre?
No, he just has to be proven to be a bad commander. Someone who lost control or failed to report a crime after the fact.
And that failure, that absence of action, could legally hold him responsible for hundreds of murders as if he'd committed them himself.
That completely changes the game.
It's an existential threat. And Tyson, this suburban executive who's used to fighting hostile takeovers, he completely shifts gears. He goes to the law library.
And he starts digging. The Peers Commission report on the My Lai massacre, Burns military law, the UCMJ, the manual for courts-martial.
He's preparing for a totally different kind of war.
He even notes the irony of it. He remembers serving on courts-martial boards back in the day. He thought military law was pretty fair. You know, it had a certain element of common sense.
But the actual trials he saw, especially overseas, he described them as grim, dreary, little Kafkaesque affairs. They seemed designed to just process the accused as quickly as possible.
And now he realizes he's about to be fed into that same machine. But this time, he's the target.
And as he studied military law, his personal life just starts to completely collapse.
His lawyer, Sloan, lays out the two options for the libel suit. Option 1, sue right away, get small damages, hope for a quick retraction.
Or option 2, wait. Wait until the damage is massive. You lose your job, your son is getting harassed at school, your reputation is destroyed, then you sue for a gigantic award, vindication and wealth.
And Tyson, who sees himself as a fighter, he leans toward the big public battle.
Which is a decision that has immediate and terrible consequences for his family.
The media, they smell blood in the water, and they dig up this devastating picture of his wife, Marcy.
The nude photo. It's a full frontal nude of her from the 60s. She's standing on the rim of a fountain, fist in the air, this image of defiance and joy.
But the caption, depending on the paper, frames it as a rock concert, a love-in, an anti-war rally, a happening. The image itself was just incendiary in the late 80s.
And this detail, which seems so far from a war crime in Vietnam, is what truly devastates their son, David.
He starts getting filthy notes in his locker at school. And it's heartbreaking, because David tells his dad the harassment isn't even really about him, the alleged war criminal.
It's about his mother. The scandalous, liberated woman from the 60s. This just throws Tyson's whole world into chaos. How is his son supposed to cope with this?
And Marcy's reaction is just as intense. She's torn between fight or flight.
Right.
She keeps suggesting they run away, to Brazil or Sweden.
But there's this one moment, this one line that lays bare everything they've suppressed for decades. She says to him, You killed more people than I fucked."
Wow.
It just reveals that the psychological price of his time in combat has been paid by both of them in silence for years.
So while the Tysons are going through this personal hell, the government is already moving. And they're moving with remarkable speed.
There's a high-level meeting. You've got Thomas Berg, General Van Arken from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the JAG Corps, and Peter Truscott from the Attorney General's office.
And they quickly confirm the basics. Murder has no statute of limitations under the UCMJ.
And yes, command responsibility is a valid legal theory. An officer can be tried for the crimes of his troops.
But the big problem, the huge hurdle, is jurisdiction. Tyson is a civilian.
He's been honorably discharged. He's living a civilian life. They can't touch him.
So General Van Arken, the top military lawyer, he proposes this incredibly bold and, frankly, legally untested move.
A recall to active duty.
A recall after all this time.
The logic is simple, but it's profound. The Army cannot investigate a civilian named Ben Tyson from Garden City, but it absolutely can investigate Lieutenant Benjamin J. Tyson.
Recalling him drags him back under UCMJ jurisdiction. And as Van Arken argues, it also puts him under its protection.
And Van Arken gives the moral reason for this. He says if they turn their backs on 200 alleged victims, then the Army is as guilty as he is.
So it's not a vendetta. It's framed as institutional self-policing. The Army has to clean its own house no matter how hard it is.
And this is where we find the ultimate, just Kafka-esque piece of bureaucracy that makes the whole thing possible. The source material pinpoints the exact moment Tyson sealed his own fate 18 years earlier.
It's mid-April 1975. South Vietnam is collapsing. Quang Tri, Hue, Da Nang are all falling.
Tyson is filled with bitterness, with rage over this wasted war, and he gets a standard form letter in the mail. It asks if he wants to remain on or be dropped from the inactive reserve rolls.
All they had to do was check the box to be dropped. That would end the Army's claim on him forever.
But he didn't. He was so angry he didn't check either box. He just scribbled a nasty little note on a letter and mailed it back.
And that was it.
That was it. That failure to check the box, fueled by bitterness from nearly 2 decades ago, meant he legally remained on the inactive reserve rolls. It was the tiny administrative error that gave the military the legal loophole it needed to bring the hammer down.
So the decision is made. They're going to recall him. And the Army needs the right person to run the investigation. This is a political and legal powder keg.
Right. General Van Arken picks a Major Karen Harper. He tells his staff she has to be thorough, show good initiative, and critically, she needs to have been in a media vacuum.
So she wouldn't be biased by the book.
Exactly. And Harper's profile is interesting. She's from rural Ohio, went to Ohio State, then American University for law school, and the Defense Department paid her tuition.
Which Tyson later notes suggests she was dirt poor. He's trying to size her up.
He is, and she satisfies the main requirement. She'd just gotten back from a 30-day leave in the Far East. She hadn't been swimming in the media frenzy over Picard's book.
So Tyson, still technically a civilian at this point, he meets her off-post for these initial interviews.
He immediately clocks her efficient military bearing. But he also sees what he thinks is a kind of Midwestern ingenuousness mixed with a certain cunning. It puts him on guard.
And he tries to assert some dominance right away. He challenges her credentials. He says, "You've never investigated a murder before."
And her comeback is just perfect. The source captures it. She just looks at him coolly and says, "I've never been suspected of a murder before. Small world."
And he knows right then he's not dealing with some pushover.
Not at all. He recognizes he's facing a very capable, very focused professional, and he slowly starts answering her questions, even as she carefully avoids the central issue of the massacre itself.
It's during these early meetings that Tyson, maybe a bit defensively, shows her his war decoration.
Yeah, he lays them out. 2 Purple Hearts, 1 wound on his knee that looks like a question mark, another that disfigured his ear, the combat infantryman's badge, the Vietnamese cross of gallantry.
And he also mentions a really telling detail. He says he was also supposed to get a Silver Star for the same action that earned him the Vietnamese cross, but the recommendation paperwork got lost.
Which is important for 2 reasons. First, it establishes he was a genuinely brave soldier. He's not just some REMF. But second, it foreshadows what his defense team will do later. They're going to use that misplaced valor to try and rebuild his heroic identity in the courtroom.
He also talks openly about how he was feeling back in 1975 when he got that fateful questionnaire. He admits he was bitter and angry watching South Vietnam collapse.
It was reawakening all these old, painful memories of a lost cause. And that anger is what led him to scribble that note instead of just checking the box. The psychological root of his legal problem goes deep.
So the preliminary investigation wraps up, and then the axe falls. Tyson gets his recall orders. It's a letter that starts with the word greeting. He says, after that, it was all downhill.
Civilian life is officially over. Lieutenant Tyson is back in the Army.
He's assigned to a Colonel Levin at Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn. And this is not a gentle reentry. The restrictions are immediate and harsh. It's a clear signal the Army is going to control every part of his life.
First thing, Colonel Levin confiscates his passport. Tyson protests, and Levin just shrugs and says, "Beats me. Those are my orders."
So any idea of fleeing the country is gone. The executive is now an involuntary soldier.
And the confinement is deliberately punishing. He's confined to his quarters on post from midnight to 6 a.m. His off-duty travel is restricted to a 50-mile radius.
And his family is on Long Island, which is 100 miles away.
Exactly. So the rule effectively guarantees he's separated from Marcy and David. It destroys the last bit of his old life and isolates him completely.
And to really add insult to injury, they give him this utterly demeaning job.
Assistant curator at the Post Museum, which is basically a mid-19th century artillery casemate, a stone bunker.
So a man who ran a major corporation is now spending his days giving tours to senior citizens and staring at old cannons.
The message couldn't be clearer. The army is reducing this privileged civilian into a tightly controlled, marginalized, almost ridiculous figure. It's all part of that Kafkaesque environment he's been thrown into.
And while Lieutenant Tyson is staring at dusty cannons, the media frenzy outside Fort Hamilton just keeps growing. He's got this developing celebrity status, albeit of a questionable nature.
Marcy, she is using her PR background to try and manage the chaos. She notes that Andrew Picard, the author, is hot. He's good on talk shows. And she's trying to cling to that old maxim, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Even as she's slamming the freezer door on reporters who are staking out their house.
The media also keeps hitting their marriage. There's a newspaper article with the headline, Splitsville for Tysons. It even hints at some kind of impropriety between Tyson and Major Harper.
Which is almost certainly not true, but it just adds more pressure, more isolation.
But here's something truly fascinating, and it really speaks to the high political stakes of this whole trial. Tyson starts to realize he has some unseen institutional support.
He calls it a guardian angel, a G-man from a shady cabal. Someone is twisting arms at his bank. His mortgage payments are suspended. His property taxes are being paid.
Wait, so the same government that's prosecuting him for mass murder is also protecting him from bankruptcy? Why would they do that?
Because the government cares about the optics of the process, not just the verdict. If Tyson were to commit economic suicide, if he lost his house, his family was destroyed, and then he was acquitted, it would be a massive embarrassment for the military justice system.
So they need him solvent. They need him to look like a respectable figure standing trial. It's not a favor to him.
No, it's a cynical, strategic move to manage public relations.
Wow. Okay, so that brings us to the central question, the legal and dramatic heart of this whole thing. What actually happened on February 15th, 1968 at that hospital?
Tyson gives his version to Major Harper, but he starts with this really disturbing incident that happened just before they even got to the hospital.
The NVA burial mound. Tyson says his platoon came across some Vietnamese civilians burying 8 NVA bodies, and one of his men, a PFC Simcox, just says tonelessly, "Let's waste them."
And Tyson stops him. He orders him at ease, so he prevents a murder.
He does. But his moral failure comes just moments later. He can't identify the burial party, so he takes their shovels, and then he orders his men to report 3 confirmed NVA kills. He fakes the body count.
And then he turns to his RTO, Kelly, and says, "My God, Kelly, we're Nazis."
That detail is so crucial for the prosecution because it establishes that Tyson, the commander, was already compromised. He was already capable of institutional lying before they even got to the hospital. He'd already poisoned the chain of command.
So when they do approach the hospital, Tyson says they saw a building flying an enemy flag, either VC or NVA, and his mindset was purely military.
An enemy flag equals enemy people. That's what he said.
So they fired probing rounds, used tear gas before they went in. He says it wasn't because they were trigger happy, it was out of caution. They'd been ambushed before.
But the assault just descends into absolute carnage. They go into this complex and they see the sign. Na Thong Hospital. They immediately start taking casualties. Peterson gets a sucking chest wound. Moody gets hit in the thigh. Kane, one of their own, is killed inside.
And Tyson describes just total chaos. Wounded VC or NVA soldiers mixed in with doctors and civilians. He says a VC nurse fired a pistol at them.
He even tries to rationalize the horror. He claims people were being thrown out of the windows of the burning maternity ward to save them from the fire.
His whole defense to Harper is that this was a blundered assault, a tragedy born of confusion, not an intentional massacre. He blames the enemy for using the hospital as a fighting position.
But even as he's defending himself, you can see his internal struggle. He says, "I'm having second thoughts about what happened, but I shouldn't have second thoughts. My perceptions at the time were the correct ones."
He's fighting his own memory.
He is, but the prosecution has witnesses, and they're fueled by a lot more than just a search for the truth.
Major Harper confirms that one of Picard's main sources was Tyson's former platoon medic, a Dr. Stephen Brandt, who's now a successful orthopedist in Boston.
And Brandt not only reiterated and confirmed the story about the massacre to Harper, he actually added new details after he read the book.
But Brandt's motivation is intensely personal. It's about revenge. When Tyson confronts him later, Brandt confesses that he's always hated him.
And it goes back to one specific incident, a Corden incident, where Tyson publicly humiliated Brandt by throwing him into a leech-infested rice paddy.
And this is more than just a grudge. Brandt saw the investigation as his chance to get back at Tyson. He admits he waited every single day for Tyson to be the one to report the massacre first. He says he felt his fingers closing around Tyson's balls.
So his testimony isn't about justice, it's about vengeance for a 2-decade-old humiliation.
Then you have Farley's testimony at the court-martial. And that's all about establishing a pattern of murderous intent and command failure.
Farley confirms the burial mound incident. He says Tyson ordered the peasants to be shot. Now, no one obeyed the order, but the intent was there.
And crucially, Farley testifies that after the initial firefight at the hospital, men started shooting patients who were clearly not enemy soldiers. And during this, Farley says Tyson just stood there most of the time.
He was observing, not stopping it, not imposing order, which feeds directly into that Yamashita command responsibility standard.
The cover-up itself is laid bare by Daniel Kelly, Tyson's RTO. He testifies during the sentencing hearing about that night in the bunker, right after the incident.
Kelly confirms that Tyson coached everyone on the unified cover story. He even congratulated one of the men, Scorello, on using a phosphorus grenade to burn the hospital down.
And Kelly talks about this psychological shift, this neat switch with reality. He says, by dawn, the fake story that they killed 12 enemy soldiers and the enemy burned the hospital, it wasn't a story anymore. It had become the truth.
It was a collective self-deception that the defense lawyer Corva would later seize on.
We also have to talk about what Kelly reveals about Brandt's character. It's a bombshell.
A huge bombshell. Kelly alleges that during earlier Corden operations, Brandt was taking pictures of naked women being tortured and humiliated by the National Police, and he was trading those photos for goods.
So this paints Brandt not just as someone with a grudge, but as a morally compromised sociopath.
Which is a massive win for the defense. But look at the timing. Corva saves this for the sentencing phase. If he'd brought it up earlier, he would have to call other platoon members to confirm it.
And those were the men he called our murderers. He couldn't risk putting them on the stand.
Exactly. He needed to destroy the prosecution's witness without implicating his own potential witnesses in the original crime. It was brilliant.
And finally, there's Sister Teresa, the nun who started it all. She recognized Tyson. She told Picard that he came into her hiding place and spared her life.
Which suggests he was capable of mercy. But in the same breath, she told Picard that Tyson's platoon murdered everyone else in the hospital. This act of mercy is wrapped up inside a mass murder.
And Major Harper uses this contradiction to pin Tyson down. She presents him with the ultimate legal dilemma that will define his fate.
She says, look, the question is, did Sister Teresa witness a blundered assault? Because if she did, that's manslaughter.
And the statute of limitations for manslaughter would have long expired. Tyson would walk free.
Or, she says, did she witness a cold-blooded massacre, followed by the deliberate burning of the hospital to cover the evidence? Because that's murder, and murder has no statute of limitations.
The legal system has backed him into a corner where admitting to a lesser crime, a command failure, might have saved him. But his pride, the 18-year-old cover-up, it just ensures the murder charge is going to stick.
And Tyson, he's trapped. He nearly shouts back at her that the victims were killed by communists or they fled in the panic. He's still clinging desperately to that 18-year-old story.
So to fight this battle, this war of memories and legal definitions, Tyson hires Vincent Corva, a defense attorney who also served in Vietnam.
And Corvin immediately reframes the fight. He says this isn't about what happened on the ground in 1968. This is a battle that's going to take place up here in the mind.
He cuts right through all the noise with that cynical clarity, reinforcing what we said at the start. Ultimately, all war stories are bullshit.
And he gives Tyson his marching orders. Forget your marriage, forget your lifestyle, focus only on this case. He says, if you don't keep your mind on this case, I'm walking out on it.
And Corva's first big tactical decision is absolutely ruthless. It's about Tyson's old platoon members.
He decides not to call any of them, Scorello, Sadowski, Beltran, none of them, even though they were willing to testify for Tyson.
And why?
Because it's a trap. If they testify and say it was just a chaotic firefight, they're perjuring themselves about the cover-up. But if they admit to the cover-up, they're admitting to being accessories to mass murder.
Corva calls them our murderers. And you can't put a murderer on the stand to defend your client.
So the defense strategy is clear. It's purely destructive. They're going to wait for the prosecution to present its flawed, witness-dependent case, and then they're just going to tear Brandt and Farley apart on cross-examination. Expose them as liars.
The whole process officially kicks off with the Article 32 hearing. That's the military's version of a grand jury.
And Major Harper presents her recommendation, and it's a remarkable moment. She admits that her recommendation is based only on the sworn statements of Brandt and Farley.
She admits there's no documentary evidence, no physical evidence, no bodies, no reports, nothing after 2 decades. The entire case rests on the credibility of 2 deeply flawed men.
And yet, the charge goes forward. Violation of UCMJ, Article 118, murder.
And it's split into 2 specifications. Specification 1 for the Oriental victims, not less than 90, and Specification 2 for the Caucasian staff and their families.
And the wording of the charge is designed to cover every possible scenario. It accuses Tyson of engaging in acts that showed a wanton disregard of human life, causing the murder, by means of shooting them or causing them to be shot or ordering them to be shot.
It's a net designed to catch him no matter what.
It is. So the trial proceeds. Corva's cross-examination does a good job of raising doubts about Brandt's story, but the basic outline of a massacre, it stays pretty much intact.
So the defense saves its most explosive material for the sentencing phase.
First, Corva presents Tyson's decorations, and he symbolically pins the ribbon for that unawarded silver star onto Tyson's uniform. He's trying to restore Tyson's identity as a hero in front of the board.
Then he calls Daniel Kelly, the RTO.
And Kelly delivers the bombshells. First, he confirms the entire cover-up in the bunker. He details how Tyson coached the story, that neat switch with reality.
But then he delivers the devastating blow against Brandt. He tells the court about Brandt taking pictures of naked women being tortured for profit.
This exposure of Brandt's depravity, saved for this exact moment, it completely demolishes the character of the prosecution's star witness.
But Kelly also delivers this profound philosophical truth to the court. He says that once the cover story was set, by dawn it was not a story, it was the truth. The need for self-preservation had rewritten history for the whole platoon.
But despite Corva's tactical success, Tyson feels he has to speak. He makes an unsworn statement. It's his one last chance to define the crime he actually committed, not the one the Army charged him with.
He stands up and tells the court that his real crime wasn't the initial massacre. He blames that on batter fatigue, on chaos. He says the real crime was the crime that occurred some day later, when I walked past battalion headquarters and failed to enter there and do my duty.
He's confessing, not to murder, but to a moral failure of command. He's admitting he chose the cover-up over his ethical duty to report the truth.
He points out the terrible irony that only 3 men never pulled the trigger during the massacre.
Yeah.
Himself, Kelly, and Brandt. The 3 men who either oversaw it, enabled it, or documented it.
And then he delivers the final, shocking truth, a secret he's carried for 18 years. He confesses that he was the one who shot Larry Kane, his own man, outside the hospital.
Kane wasn't killed by a sniper, as the official story went.
No, Tyson shot him. He admits his own hands are stained with blood, just not the blood of the hospital victims.
He forces the court to confront the moral ambiguity of it all, the terror of the moment, and the calculated lie afterward. He even tells them, I cannot sit here in good conscience and tell you that if I had it to do over again, I would do my duty as I clearly understood it.
He's saying he'd probably choose the cover-up again. It's a stunning admission.
So the court-martial board, 6 officers, they deliver their verdict pretty quickly. And the finding is guilty on the charge of murder.
But the modification to the specifications, that's the key. That's the synthesis of this entire complex legal battle.
They find him guilty of specification 1 and 2, accepting that the words shooting them and ordering them to be shot are deleted.
And they leave in just 3 words.
Causing them to be shot.
That subtle rewording is the entire point. The board is implicitly saying, we can't prove you shot anyone, we can't prove you gave a direct order to kill patients.
Vindicating his claim.
In a way. But by leaving and causing them to be shot, they are affirming his guilt based purely on command culpability. His failure to act, his failure to control his troops, the Yamashita standard, his creation of the cover-up. He was found guilty of murder for being a bad commander.
So the Ben Tyson case, at the end of the day, it became this profound study in institutional accountability. It wasn't really about the specific chaotic events of that firefight 20 years ago.
No, it was about the lasting moral obligations of command. The Army's instinct, shown in that surgically precise verdict, was to prosecute the crime of dispassion. Tyson's failure to report the truth for 2 decades.
The system showed that, Army justice may not be perfect, but it is instinctive
Yeah.
and often uncannily just. They focused on the moral duty of an officer, and they enforced it 20 years later.
And Corva sums up the paradox of it all so well. He tells Tyson that even though he's been found guilty, when he walks out of that courtroom, even in handcuffs, he will finally be free.
He shed the psychological burden of that secret he carried for 18 years. A personal exorcism forced on him by the military justice system.
And the core of this whole deep dive, it really hinged on that distinction, didn't it? Between active participation and causing them to be shot. It forces you to acknowledge that in the eyes of the law, the failure to prevent a crime when you have the authority to do so can be just as bad as committing it yourself.
So the question for you, the listener, is a profound one. Does the fog of war ever really clear enough to find objective truth? Or was Corva right that what we call truth is just what we choose not to forget? The collective nightmare in that hospital became the truth for the court.
And here's a final provocative thought. Tyson was judged and found guilty, mainly for the cover-up and his failure to report. But the whole process of recalling him and forcing the truth out also led to Kelly exposing Major Brandt's long-term depraved criminal behavior.
So the system found Tyson guilty.
But in doing so, it forced a measure of historical honesty that brought a sociopath to light. Sometimes, justice delivers unexpected truths, even through an imperfect process.
The verdict was delivered in that courtroom. But as the philosopher Albert Camus is quoted in our source, the final judgment takes place every day.
We hope this deep dive into the legal and moral quagmire of the Benjamin Tyson case leaves you well informed and with a lot to consider.